The marble foyer of the Riverside Drive mansion echoed with the sharp click of Marcus Wellington's Italian leather shoes as he paced before the grand staircase. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit tailored to emphasize his broad shoulders, and his green eyes held that particular gleam of a man who believed the world bent to his will. At 52, Marcus had built his reputation as a commercial real estate mogul on his ability to take what he wanted when he wanted it. Before we dive deeper into this story of shocking revelations, I'm curious where you're watching from today. Whether you're in a cozy apartment or a grand house like this one, property ownership can be far more complicated than it appears on the surface. Elena sat quietly on the cream-colored sofa in the living room, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a worn cardigan over jeans that had seen better days. At 45, she had learned to make herself small in this house, to avoid drawing attention that might trigger another of Marcus's verbal assaults. Her brown eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried the weariness of a woman who had spent 15 years walking on eggshells. Marcus stopped pacing and turned toward her with that familiar smirk that made her stomach clench. Today, something was different. The smugness in his expression had reached new heights, and the way he straightened his red silk tie suggested he was preparing to deliver news he found particularly delicious. "Sophia is moving in permanently," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. "She'll be taking the master bedroom, naturally. You can use the guest room at the end of the hall." Elena's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands. She set it down on the glass coffee table with careful precision, the way she had learned to do everything in this house. "Measured, controlled, safe." "Marcus," she began quietly, "this is still my home too. We're married. You can't just decide to move another woman into our bedroom." His laughter filled the high-ceilinged room, bouncing off the crystal chandelier and the oil paintings that lined the walls. "Our bedroom? Elena, let me remind you of a few facts. This house is in my name. The mortgage payments come from my account. The property taxes are paid with my money. You contribute nothing to this household except the occasional mediocre dinner and your constant complaining." He walked closer to the sofa, looming over her in a way that made her instinctively lean back into the cushions. His voice dropped to the patronizing tone he used when explaining things to people he considered intellectually inferior. "You seem to have forgotten your place here," Marcus continued. "You're living in my house, eating my food, wearing clothes I paid for. The fact that we went through some meaningless ceremony 15 years ago doesn't give you ownership of anything. Marriage is just a piece of paper, Elena. Property ownership is real." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 3 times, marking the afternoon with its deep, resonant tone. Elena stared at the Persian rug beneath her feet, focusing on its intricate patterns while her mind raced. She had heard variations of this speech countless times over the years, each instance chipping away at her sense of self-worth like water eroding stone. But something was different today. Something had shifted in the past few weeks. The phone calls she had been making during Marcus's business trips, the documents she had been reviewing, the conversations with people whose names she carefully avoided mentioning. Today, she almost smiled at the irony of his words. "When do you expect her to arrive?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus checked his platinum Rolex with theatrical precision. "She'll be here within the hour. I suggest you use that time to move your things out of the master suite. And Elena, try not to embarrass yourself when she arrives. Sophia is everything you've never been. Elegant, sophisticated, worthy of this lifestyle." The sound of gravel crunching in the circular driveway interrupted his monologue. A black BMW convertible pulled up to the front entrance, its engine purring with expensive precision. Through the tall windows, Elena could see a woman with platinum blonde hair stepping out of the car. Even from a distance, Sophia Reynolds commanded attention. Her red dress clung to her curves like it had been painted on, and her heels clicked confidently on the stone walkway. Marcus's entire demeanor changed as he watched his mistress approach. His chest puffed out with pride, his shoulders squared with possession, and his smile became genuine for the first time in months. This was a man displaying his prize, showing off his ability to attract and keep a woman 20 years younger than his wife. Sophia burst through the front door without knocking, her arms laden with shopping bags from exclusive boutiques. Her blue eyes swept over the foyer with the calculating gaze of someone already planning renovations. She was beautiful in the artificial way that money could buy, with perfect teeth, flawless skin, and features that suggested the skilled work of plastic surgeons. "Darling," she called to Marcus, ignoring Elena completely, "I picked up some samples from the decorator. I think we should redo the entire master suite. The current color scheme is so dated." She dropped her bags on the marble floor and wrapped her arms around Marcus's neck, kissing him with deliberate passion while maintaining eye contact with Elena. It was a performance, a marking of territory as primitive as it was effective. Marcus pulled away from the kiss with obvious reluctance. "Sophia, I want you to meet Elena. She's been living here, but she'll be relocating to more appropriate accommodations." Sophia turned toward Elena for the first time, her gaze sweeping from head to toe with barely concealed disdain. "Oh," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had spent money to sound more sophisticated than her background suggested. "You're smaller than I expected." Elena stood slowly from the sofa, smoothing down her cardigan with hands that only trembled slightly. "Nice to meet you, Sophia." The younger woman laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "How quaint. Marcus, she really is as pathetic as you described." Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in years. It was the sensation of a woman who had been pushed too far, who had finally reached the limit of what she was willing to endure. But she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she walked quietly toward the grand staircase, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Behind her, she could hear Sophia already discussing which furniture needed to be removed from the master bedroom and which walls should be repainted. Marcus contributed enthusiastic agreement to every suggestion, his voice filled with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally rid himself of an unwanted burden. As Elena reached the top of the stairs, she pulled her phone from her cardigan pocket and scrolled through her recent contacts. Her finger hovered over a name that Marcus had never heard mentioned in his presence. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne, real estate attorney. The call connected on the second ring. "Patricia," Elena said quietly, closing the guest room door behind her. "It's time. Chapter 1 is now complete. May I have permission to continue with Chapter 2? The crash of breaking glass echoed through the mansion's second floor as Sophia hurled Elena's jewelry box from the master bedroom window. The antique mahogany container, a wedding gift from Elena's grandmother, shattered against the stone patio below, scattering costume jewelry and sentimental trinkets across the manicured lawn. "That hideous thing doesn't match my aesthetic," Sophia declared, examining her perfectly manicured nails with satisfaction. She wore a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her platinum hair styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the bedroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena stood in the doorway, watching 15 years of her life being systematically erased from the room where she had once slept peacefully. Cardboard boxes labeled Elena's junk were stacked haphazardly in the hallway, filled with photo albums, books, and personal mementos that Sophia had deemed unworthy of the space. Marcus emerged from the walk-in closet carrying an armload of Elena's dresses, his face flushed with the excitement of someone finally able to act on long-suppressed impulses. "These can go to charity," he announced. "Sophia will need the entire closet for her wardrobe." He dropped the clothes into another box with careless disregard for the silk blouses and wool skirts that Elena had carefully maintained for years. The wedding dress she had worn when they exchanged vows lay crumpled on top, its pearl buttons catching the light like tears. Sophia clapped her hands together with childlike delight. "Oh, Marcus, you're so decisive. I love a man who knows what he wants." She turned toward Elena with mock sympathy. "I hope you understand, dear. A woman of my caliber requires proper accommodations." Elena pulled out her smartphone and began taking photographs of the scene, her movements so subtle that neither Marcus nor Sophia noticed. The phone's camera captured box after box of her possessions, the broken jewelry box visible through the window, and the cruel satisfaction on both their faces. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, finally noticing the device in her hands. "Just documenting the moving process," Elena replied quietly. "For my records." Marcus snatched the phone from her hands with violent quickness, his fingers gripping her wrist hard enough to leave marks. "You don't need records of anything. This is my house, and I decide what gets documented. He scrolled through the recent photos, deleting each one with aggressive taps of his finger. His jaw clenched with fury as he realized how many images she had captured before he noticed. "You sneaky little parasite," he hissed. "Always scheming, always trying to find some angle. Well, let me make this clear. You have no rights here. No claims. No documentation needs." He shoved the phone back at her with enough force to make her stumble backward into the hallway. Sophia watched the interaction with obvious pleasure, her blue eyes sparkling with malicious joy. That evening, the mansion filled with the sounds of Marcus's dinner party. He had invited 12 of their mutual friends and business associates, ostensibly to celebrate a recent real estate deal, but everyone understood the real purpose. This was Marcus's public declaration of his new relationship status. Elena found herself relegated to the role of servant, carrying trays of appetizers and refilling wine glasses while Marcus played the gracious host. He had positioned Sophia at the head of the dining room table, in the chair that Elena had occupied for 15 years during countless dinner parties in this very room. Sophia wore a black evening gown that emphasized every curve, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight from the crystal chandelier above. She held court like a queen, regaling the guests with stories of her modeling career and her plans for redecorating the mansion. "As you can see," Marcus announced during the main course, raising his wine glass towards Sophia, "I've finally found a woman worthy of this home. Someone who appreciates the finer things in life and has the sophistication to enhance rather than diminish our social standing." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, shooting sympathetic glances toward Elena as she cleared empty plates with practiced efficiency. Dr. James Morrison, Marcus's longtime business partner, cleared his throat nervously. "Marcus, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for such announcements," he suggested diplomatically. Marcus's laughter boomed across the dining room. "James, my friend, there's never been a more appropriate time. For too long, I've been carrying dead weight in this relationship. It's time everyone understood the new reality." He gestured grandly toward Elena, who was serving dessert with steady hands despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "This woman has lived in my house rent-free for 15 years. She's contributed nothing to our social circle, nothing to my business success, nothing to the maintenance of this property. She's been a charity case, and frankly, I'm tired of supporting someone who brings no value to my life." Sophia reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand. "Darling, you're so generous to have tolerated the situation for so long. Not every man would have shown such patience." The guests ate their chocolate mousse in uncomfortable silence, unable to meet Elena's eyes as she moved around the table. Margaret Rothschild, who had been Elena's friend since college, finally spoke up. "Elena has always been a wonderful hostess," she said carefully. "We've all enjoyed many lovely evenings in this home." Marcus waved dismissively. "Past tense, Margaret. Past tense. Sophia will be taking over all hostess duties from now on. Someone with actual style and grace." Elena paused in the kitchen doorway, pulling her phone from her apron pocket. The voice recording app had been running since the dinner began, capturing every word of Marcus's public humiliation campaign. She saved the file with the date and time, adding it to a growing folder labeled Evidence. When she returned to clear the final course, she overheard Marcus explaining his property ownership to anyone who would listen. He spoke with the authority of a man who had never been challenged, detailing how his name alone appeared on the deed, how his income alone qualified for the mortgage, how his business success alone had made their lifestyle possible. "Elena has always been financially dependent," he continued, cutting into his dessert with aggressive precision. "She's never owned property, never built a business, never contributed anything meaningful to our household income. This mansion, the cars, the investments, everything belongs to me." Dr. Morrison's wife, Patricia, glanced toward the kitchen where Elena was washing dishes. "She seems like such a capable woman, though. Surely she's contributed in other ways." Sophia laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Capable? At what? Making mediocre meals and dusting furniture? Those aren't exactly valuable skills in today's economy." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. In the modern world, women need to bring something to the table besides domestic service. Sophia has her own career, her own accomplishments, her own sense of style and sophistication. As the evening wound down and guests began making their excuses to leave early, Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching the last cars disappear down the long driveway. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Documents are ready for review. Can you meet tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Elena typed back quickly. Yes. Same location. She deleted the message thread and returned to loading the dishwasher, her movements automatic after years of cleaning up after Marcus's entertaining. Upstairs, she could hear Sophia's laughter echoing through the master bedroom, followed by Marcus's deeper voice discussing their plans for the weekend. Tomorrow, Elena thought as she turned off the kitchen lights, everything would begin to change. Chapter 2 is now complete. May I have permission to continue with Chapter 3? The manila envelope landed on the breakfast table with a sharp slap, startling Elena from her morning coffee. She looked up to find Marcus standing over her, fully dressed in his charcoal gray business suit despite the early hour. His green eyes held a cold satisfaction that she had learned to recognize as the prelude to his most devastating attacks. "Legal papers," Marcus announced, straightening his burgundy tie with theatrical precision. "Since you seem unable to understand verbal instructions, I've decided to make our new arrangement official." Elena set down her coffee cup, noting how the morning sunlight streaming through the bay windows cast long shadows across the legal documents. Her hands remained steady as she reached for the envelope, though her heart rate quickened with anticipation rather than fear. "Notice of eviction," Marcus continued, pacing around the breakfast nook like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. After that, I'll be calling the police to have you removed for trespassing." Sophia emerged from the kitchen wearing one of Marcus's dress shirts and nothing else, her platinum hair tousled in a way that suggested she had been modeling the look rather than sleeping. She carried a crystal glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. The kind that Elena used to make every morning before Sophia's arrival had relegated her to instant coffee and stale toast. "Oh, wonderful," Sophia purred, settling into the chair beside Marcus with feline grace. "I was hoping we could make this official. I've already scheduled the interior designer for Thursday. We're going to completely transform this dreary place." She gestured around the breakfast nook with obvious disdain. The warm yellow walls, hand-painted with sunflowers that Elena had spent weeks perfecting, suddenly seemed to shrink under Sophia's critical gaze. The antique hutch displaying Elena's grandmother's china collection looked shabby and outdated in the harsh morning light. Elena opened the envelope and examined the legal documents with careful attention. Her expression remained neutral as she read through the formal language, the legal justifications, and the timeline for her removal. When she finished, she folded the papers neatly and placed them back in the envelope. "Marcus," she said quietly, "are you absolutely certain that you have the legal authority to evict me from this house?" The question seemed to amuse him immensely. His laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing between the exposed wooden beams that had always been one of his favorite architectural features to show off to guests. "Elena, your desperation is showing," he replied, pulling out his smartphone with confident flourish. "Let me call my attorney right now and have him explain property law to you in terms simple enough for your limited understanding." He dialed a number from his contacts and put the call on speaker, clearly intending to humiliate her further with a public legal consultation. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. "Wellington and Associates. How may I direct your call?" "This is Marcus Wellington. I need to speak with David immediately." "One moment, please, Mr. Wellington." While they waited for the attorney to come on the line, Sophia began sketching renovation plans on a napkin. She drew quick diagrams of the breakfast nook, marking areas where she wanted to install built-in seating and a wine refrigerator. Her enthusiasm for erasing Elena's presence from the house was palpable. "Marcus," David Patterson's voice came through the speaker with practiced authority. "What can I do for you this morning?" "David, I need you to confirm something for my soon-to-be ex-wife," Marcus said, shooting Elena a triumphant look. "She seems to think she has some claim to our house on Riverside Drive. Can you explain to her that the property is solely in my name?" "Absolutely," the attorney replied without hesitation. "The deed is registered to Marcus Wellington exclusively. The mortgage is in his name alone. All property taxes are paid from his accounts. Mrs. Wellington has no legal claim to the residence whatsoever." Sophia clapped her hands together with delight, the napkin sketches fluttering to the floor. Marcus ended the call and slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket with the satisfaction of a man who had just delivered a knockout punch. There you have it, Marcus declared. Professional legal opinion from one of the most respected real estate attorneys in the state. You have no rights here, Elena. You never did. Elena nodded slowly, as if processing this information for the first time. She stood from her chair with deliberate calm, smoothing down her simple blue dress and adjusting the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. For the first time in months, her posture was straight, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. I appreciate the clarification, Marcus, she said, her voice carrying a new quality that neither Marcus nor Sophia immediately recognized. However, I think there might be some confusion about the property records. Marcus's confident expression flickered slightly. What kind of confusion? Elena walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the breakfast nook, the same desk where she had handled all the household correspondence for 15 years. She opened the bottom drawer and withdrew a leather portfolio that Marcus had never paid attention to. You see, Elena continued, opening the portfolio with careful precision, I've been doing some research of my own, and I discovered something quite interesting about this property. She pulled out a document that was clearly much older than the papers Marcus's attorney had referenced. The parchment was yellowed with age, the text written in formal legal language, and the official seals and signatures were faded but still clearly visible. This is the original deed to this property, Elena announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. It was transferred to me by my grandmother, Eleanor Richardson, in her will. The transfer took place 6 months before Marcus and I were married. The breakfast nook fell completely silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the adjoining living room. Sophia's orange juice glass had stopped halfway to her lips, frozen in mid-motion. Marcus's confident smirk was slowly transforming into something more uncertain. That's impossible, Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. I bought this house. I qualified for the mortgage. I've been making payments for 15 years. Elena smiled for the first time in weeks, the expression transforming her entire face and reminding anyone who looked closely of the vibrant woman she had been before years of emotional abuse had dimmed her spirit. Actually, Marcus, you've been paying rent, she said, producing another document from the portfolio. This is the rental agreement you signed when you moved in after our wedding. The mortgage you think you've been paying? That's for the commercial property downtown where your office is located. She spread both documents on the breakfast table, positioning them where both Marcus and Sophia could read the legal text clearly. The morning sunlight illuminated the papers like a spotlight on a stage, making the official seals and signatures impossible to ignore. Sophia finally set down her orange juice glass with a sharp clink against the wooden table. Her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and her blue eyes darted between the documents and Marcus's increasingly confused expression. Marcus snatched up the rental agreement, his hands shaking slightly as he read through the terms. His name was clearly listed as the tenant, with monthly payments designated as rent rather than mortgage installments. Elena's name appeared as the property owner, with her grandmother's estate listed as the previous owner. This has to be some kind of forgery, Marcus said, but his voice was weak, lacking conviction. You couldn't have hidden something like this for 15 years. Elena returned to the portfolio and produced a thick stack of additional documents. Bank statements showing rental income deposited into her personal account. Property tax payments made from a separate account that Marcus had never seen. Insurance policies listing her as the sole owner. Legal correspondence with the county assessor's office confirming her ownership status. The doorbell rang at that precise moment, the deep Westminster chimes echoing through the mansion's grand foyer. Elena checked her watch with the timing of someone who had been expecting this exact moment. That would be my attorney, she announced, walking toward the front door with newfound confidence. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne specializes in property law and estate planning. I thought it might be helpful to have professional legal counsel present for this conversation. Marcus stumbled after her, the eviction papers clutched in his sweating palm. Sophia remained at the breakfast table, staring at the documents spread before her as if they might disappear if she concentrated hard enough. Elena opened the front door to reveal a woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob. Dr. Hawthorne carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had accompanied her through decades of successful legal battles. Her sharp gray eyes took in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had handled similar situations many times before. "Good morning, Elena," Dr. Hawthorne said, stepping into the foyer with professional grace. "I trust you're ready to proceed with our discussion?" Marcus pushed forward, still clutching his eviction papers like a drowning man holding onto driftwood. "Just who exactly do you think you are?" he demanded, his voice pitched higher than usual with stress and confusion. Dr. Hawthorne studied Marcus with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining an interesting, but ultimately irrelevant specimen. "I'm Patricia Hawthorne, Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School, specializing in property rights and estate law. I've been representing Mrs. Richardson in property matters for the past 6 months." "Mrs. Richardson," Marcus repeated, his voice cracking slightly on the name. "Her name is Elena Wellington." Dr. Hawthorne smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Actually, Mr. Wellington, her legal name never changed. She kept her maiden name on all property documents, as is her right under state law. The name Elena Wellington only appears on social documents and your marriage certificate." Sophia appeared in the foyer, having thrown on a robe to cover Marcus's shirt. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate look of someone watching their carefully planned future crumble before their eyes. "This is ridiculous," she declared, though her voice lacked conviction. "Marcus owns this house. He's been paying for everything. We have documents." Dr. Hawthorne opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder thick with official papers. "What you have, Miss Reynolds, are documents related to a commercial property mortgage and a residential rental agreement. What I have are the original property deeds, inheritance documents, and 15 years of ownership records that clearly establish Mrs. Richardson's legal title to this residence." Marcus grabbed the folder from Dr. Hawthorne's hands, his movements jerky with panic. He spread the papers across the marble floor of the foyer, kneeling to examine each document with growing desperation. Every seal was authentic, every signature was notarized, every date confirmed Elena's story. "How?" he whispered, his earlier arrogance completely destroyed. "How is this possible?" Elena looked down at her husband kneeling on the floor surrounded by legal documents that proved his complete lack of ownership in the home he had terrorized her in for years. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had finally reclaimed her power. "It's possible, Marcus, because you never bothered to ask the right questions. You assumed that because you were the man, because you had the income, because you could intimidate me into silence, that you automatically controlled everything. But some things can't be taken by force or arrogance. Some things have to be earned, or inherited, or legally transferred. This house was none of those things for you." Dr. Hawthorne closed her briefcase with a definitive snap. "Mr. Wellington, I believe you have 72 hours to vacate these premises." Mrs. Richardson has been more than patient, but her tolerance for trespassers has reached its limit. Marcus looked up from the scattered papers, his face flushed with humiliation and growing rage. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll fight this in court. I'll prove these documents are fake." Dr. Hawthorne's smile grew even sharper. "Mr. Wellington, I've been practicing law for 37 years. I've never lost a property case. And I've certainly never lost one where my client has this much documentation proving clear legal ownership. But please, by all means, hire an attorney. The court system always appreciates easy cases." Chapter 3 is now complete. May I have permission to continue with Chapter 4? The silence in the marble foyer stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus remained kneeling on the floor, surrounded by legal documents that contradicted everything he had believed about his life for the past 15 years. His expensive suit was wrinkled from his desperate examination of the papers, and a thin line of sweat had appeared along his hairline despite the mansion's perfect climate control. Dr. Hawthorne adjusted her glasses and withdrew another folder from her briefcase, this one even thicker than the first. Her movements were precise and unhurried, like a master chess player who could see the endgame several moves ahead. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a confused child. "Perhaps it would be helpful if I walked you through the complete ownership history of this property." She opened the new folder and began arranging documents on the antique console table beside the front door. Each paper was protected by a clear plastic sleeve, and the official seals and signatures were clearly visible through the transparent covers. This property, known as 1247 Riverside Drive, was originally purchased in 1952 by Eleanor Richardson, Elena's grandmother. Dr. Hawthorne continued. Mrs. Richardson paid cash for the estate using inheritance money from her late husband's shipping business. The first document showed a deed dated 67 years earlier, written in the formal language of mid-century legal documents. Eleanor Richardson's signature was bold and confident, the signature of a woman who understood the value of property ownership. When Mrs. Richardson passed away in 2008, she left this property to her granddaughter Elena in her will. Dr. Hawthorne continued, producing the will and pointing to the relevant section with a manicured finger. The transfer was completed 6 months before Elena's marriage to you, Mr. Wellington. Marcus struggled to his feet, his face flushed with confusion and growing panic. But I've been making mortgage payments, he protested. I have bank statements showing thousands of dollars going toward this house every month. Dr. Hawthorne smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated exactly this objection. Yes, you have been making payments. However, those payments were for the mortgage on your commercial office building at 450 State Street, the building where Wellington Real Estate is headquartered. She produced a thick stack of bank statements and mortgage documents, all clearly labeled with the State Street address. Marcus's name appeared on every document, confirming his ownership of the commercial property, but there was no mention of the Riverside Drive mansion anywhere in the paperwork. Elena stepped forward, her confidence growing with each revelation. Marcus, do you remember when we were first married and you insisted on handling all the finances? You said it would be easier if everything went through your business accounts. The memory was clearly painful for Marcus to confront. His green eyes darted between Elena and Dr. Hawthorne as he tried to process the implications of what he was hearing. I set up a rental agreement, Elena continued, her voice steady and clear, so that you could live here as my husband while maintaining your financial independence. The monthly payments you thought were mortgage installments were actually rent payments to me as the property owner. Sophia, who had been standing frozen in the foyer archway, suddenly found her voice. This is insane, she shrieked, her carefully modulated tone cracking under pressure. Marcus is a successful businessman. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. He couldn't have been fooled by some rental scam for 15 years. Dr. Hawthorne turned her attention to Sophia with the clinical interest of an entomologist studying a particularly loud insect. Miss Reynolds, successful businessmen are often the easiest targets for financial misconceptions, particularly when their egos prevent them from asking detailed questions about domestic arrangements. She withdrew yet another set of documents from her seemingly bottomless briefcase. These are the property tax records for 1247 Riverside Drive, going back 15 years. Every payment has been made by Elena Richardson from her personal account, never from any account associated with Marcus Wellington or Wellington Real Estate. Marcus grabbed the tax records, scanning through year after year of payments made by Elena. His hands were shaking now, the papers rustling like autumn leaves in a strong wind. But how? He whispered, his voice barely audible. How did you have the money for property taxes? You never worked. You never had income. Elena's smile was gentle but firm, the expression of a teacher correcting a persistent student error. Marcus, I've been running a freelance financial consulting business from the home office for 12 years. My clients include several major corporations and 3 nonprofit organizations. She gestured toward the office space off the main hallway, a room that Marcus had always dismissed as Elena's hobby room where she played with computer spreadsheets to keep herself busy. The business is registered under my maiden name, Richardson Financial Services, Elena continued. I specialize in budget optimization and tax planning for small to medium businesses. Last year alone, my income exceeded $200,000. Dr. Hawthorne nodded approvingly. Mrs. Richardson has been an exemplary client from a legal standpoint. All business licensing is current, all tax obligations are met, and all property maintenance has been handled through proper legal channels. Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet like the deck of a ship in heavy seas. Everything he had believed about his marriage, his home, and his financial situation was crumbling with each new revelation. Sophia grabbed Marcus's arm with desperate intensity, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "Fight this," she hissed. "Hire the best lawyers money can buy. She can't just steal everything we've worked for." Dr. Hawthorne's laugh was sharp and precise. "Miss Reynolds, theft implies taking something that belongs to another person. Mrs. Richardson is simply reclaiming property that has always been hers. The only theft that occurred here was Mr. Wellington's assumption that he could claim ownership through intimidation and emotional abuse." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, forcing everyone to confront the reality of what had been happening in this house for years. Marcus's treatment of Elena had not been the behavior of a property owner exercising his rights, but of a tenant who had forgotten his place. Marcus pulled away from Sophia and began pacing the foyer, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble with increasing agitation. "This has to be some kind of elaborate revenge plot," he declared. "Elena could never have planned something this complex on her own." Elena stepped closer to her husband, close enough that he could see the quiet strength in her brown eyes that had been hidden for so many years beneath layers of imposed submission. "Marcus," she said softly, "you underestimated me from the moment we met. You saw a quiet woman who preferred books to parties, and you assumed that meant I was weak or stupid. But I've been planning for this day since the first time you called me worthless in my own home." She gestured around the foyer, taking in the crystal chandelier, the marble floors, and the grand staircase that curved toward the second floor like something from a movie set. "Every cruel word, every public humiliation, every time you made me feel small in the house my grandmother left me. I documented it all," Elena continued. "I have recordings, photographs, and witness statements going back years. I have proof of your affairs, your financial manipulations, and your systematic emotional abuse." Dr. Hawthorne opened a third folder, this one containing what appeared to be hundreds of pages of documented evidence. Voice recordings, time-stamped photographs, medical records from Elena's stress-related health issues, and statements from friends and family who had witnessed Marcus's behavior over the years. "Mr. Wellington, Dr. Hawthorne said, her voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You have lived in Mrs. Richardson's house for 15 years under false assumptions about your legal status. You have emotionally abused the property owner, attempted to evict her from her own home, and moved another woman into the master bedroom without permission." She closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the foyer like a judge's gavel. "Under state law, Mrs. Richardson would be well within her rights to have you charged with harassment, trespassing, and potentially domestic abuse," Dr. Hawthorne continued. "However, she has graciously decided to offer you the same 72-hour notice that you attempted to serve her this morning." Sophia's face had gone completely pale beneath her makeup, making her look like a porcelain doll that had been left in the rain. All of her confidence about redecorating the mansion and playing lady of the manor had evaporated in the face of cold legal reality. "Marcus," she said, her voice weak and uncertain, "tell me you have some way to fight this. Tell me there's some angle they haven't considered." Marcus looked at his mistress with the hollow expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. For the first time since Elena had known him, he seemed small and vulnerable, stripped of the arrogance and bluster that had defined their relationship. "There is no angle, Sophia," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never owned this house. I never had any claim to this property. I've been living here at Elena's discretion for 15 years, and I never even knew it." Elena moved to the front door and opened it wide, the afternoon sunlight streaming in to illuminate the scattered legal documents on the floor. The gesture was clear and unmistakable. 72 hours, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally reclaimed her power. "I suggest you use that time wisely to find somewhere else to live." Outside, the sound of gravel crunching announced the arrival of another vehicle. Through the open door, they could see a black sedan pulling up the circular driveway, followed by a white van with official county markings. Dr. Hawthorne checked her watch with professional precision. "Right on schedule," she announced. "I took the liberty of arranging for an official property inspection to document the current condition of the residence. Standard procedure in cases involving disputed ownership claims." The officials who emerged from the vehicles carried cameras, measuring equipment, and clipboards thick with official forms. They moved with the efficient purpose of people who had handled similar situations many times before. Marcus watched the inspection team approach the front door, and for the first time, he seemed to truly understand that his power in this house had been an illusion all along. Chapter 4 is now complete. May I have permission to continue with Chapter 5? The sound of police sirens grew louder as two patrol cars turned into the circular driveway, their red and blue lights flashing against the afternoon sunlight. Marcus instinctively stepped back from the open front door, his face draining of color as he watched the officers emerge from their vehicles with professional efficiency. Officer Jennifer Martinez was the first to approach the mansion's entrance, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun beneath her patrol cap. She carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had handled countless domestic disputes, her hand resting casually near her radio as she assessed the situation. "Good afternoon," Officer Martinez said, addressing the group assembled in the foyer. "We received a call about a trespassing situation at this address." Marcus stepped forward quickly, his business instincts kicking in despite his earlier shock. "Officer, there's been some kind of mistake. This is my house. I'm Marcus Wellington, and I've lived here for 15 years. If anyone called about trespassing, it was probably my wife having some kind of emotional breakdown." Dr. Hawthorne moved beside Elena with protective authority, her legal credentials evident in every measured movement. "Officer Martinez, I'm Dr. Patricia Hawthorne, representing the property owner in this matter." Mrs. Richardson called for assistance in removing trespassers from her legally owned residence. She handed Officer Martinez a folder containing copies of all the ownership documents they had reviewed earlier. The police officer examined each paper carefully, her trained eyes scanning the official seals, dates, and signatures with professional thoroughness. "Mrs. Richardson," Officer Martinez said, turning toward Elena, "can you provide identification confirming your identity as the property owner listed on these documents?" Elena produced her driver's license and a current utility bill, both showing her maiden name and the Riverside Drive address. The officer compared the information against the property records, nodding as each detail confirmed Elena's legal status. Officer Martinez's partner, Officer David Chun, had been quietly observing the scene from the doorway. He stepped forward with the calm authority of a veteran policeman who had seen enough domestic situations to recognize the signs of long-term emotional abuse. "Sir," he addressed Marcus directly, "do you have any documentation proving your ownership or legal right to occupy this residence?" Marcus fumbled in his jacket pockets, producing his own identification and several business cards. "Of course I do," he insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm a successful real estate developer. I own Wellington properties. I've been making mortgage payments on this house for 15 years. Officer Chun examined Marcus's identification, noting that his driver's license listed a different address entirely. "Mr. Wellington, your license shows your residence as 432 Oak Street, apartment 12B. That's not this address." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. The apartment on Oak Street was a small rental unit he had maintained as an office address for tax purposes, never intending it to be his legal residence. He had always assumed the Riverside Drive mansion was his primary address for all legal matters. Elena stepped forward with quiet dignity, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the officers. "Gentlemen, I called for assistance because Mr. Wellington has been living in my house under a rental agreement that he apparently never understood. This morning, he attempted to evict me from my own property and moved his girlfriend into the master bedroom without my permission." She gestured towards Sophia, who had been standing frozen near the grand staircase, clutching her silk robe tightly around her body. The younger woman's earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate look of someone watching their carefully planned future collapse in real time. Dr. Hawthorne produced another set of documents from her briefcase. "Officers, these are restraining order papers that were filed this morning with the county court. Mrs. Richardson is seeking legal protection from continued harassment and intimidation by Mr. Wellington." Officer Martinez reviewed the restraining order paperwork, her expression growing more serious as she read through Elena's documented complaints. The papers detailed years of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and systematic efforts to make Elena feel powerless in her own home. "Mr. Wellington," Officer Martinez announced, According to these property records and the restraining order, you need to collect your personal belongings and vacate these premises immediately. You have no legal right to remain on this property. Marcus felt the world spinning around him as the full reality of his situation finally penetrated his consciousness. "Wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "There has to be some kind of mistake. I've invested my whole life in this house. All my business associates know this as my address." Officer Chen shook his head with professional sympathy. "Sir, your business associations don't establish legal property rights. The documentation clearly shows that this residence belongs to Mrs. Richardson and has belonged to her family for decades." Sophia finally found her voice, though it came out as a high-pitched whine of panic. "What about all my things? I just moved all my furniture into the master bedroom. I can't just leave everything behind." Elena turned towards Sophia with the calm authority of someone who had finally reclaimed control of her own life. "Miss Reynolds, you moved your belongings into my house without permission. You have 1 hour to remove everything you brought here. Anything left behind will be donated to charity." Dr. Hawthorne consulted her watch with practiced precision. "The restraining order goes into effect immediately, which means Mr. Wellington cannot return to this property for any reason without risking arrest. I suggest you both take this opportunity very seriously." Marcus looked around the foyer one last time, taking in the crystal chandelier, the marble floors, and the grand staircase that he had always believed represented his success and status. The irony was crushing. He had spent 15 years tormenting Elena in a house that had never belonged to him, using her own property as a weapon against her. Officer Martinez stepped closer to Marcus, her hand moving to her handcuffs in a subtle but unmistakable warning. "Sir, I'm going to escort you upstairs to collect your personal belongings. You have 30 minutes to pack what you need, and then you need to leave these premises permanently." As Marcus climbed the grand staircase under police escort, his Italian leather shoes echoing hollowly against the marble steps, Elena stood in her foyer and felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she had carried for so many years she had forgotten what freedom felt like. Dr. Hawthorne placed a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "You did exactly the right thing," she said quietly. "Property rights exist for a reason, and no one has the right to make you feel small in your own home." Through the tall windows, Elena could see neighbors gathering on the street, drawn by the police cars and the obvious drama unfolding at the mansion. Some of them had known her for years, had attended Marcus's dinner parties, had watched her serve drinks and clear plates while he held court like a king in what they now realized was her castle. Officer Chen approached Elena with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Richardson, we'll make sure they both leave the property without any further incidents. If either of them attempts to return or contact you, call us immediately." 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from the house, carrying 2 suitcases and a cardboard box, his expensive suits wrinkled from hasty packing. Sophia followed behind him, tears streaking her makeup as she struggled with several shopping bags filled with her belongings. As their taxi pulled away down the long driveway, Elena stood in her doorway watching the red taillights disappear into the afternoon traffic. For the first time in 15 years, the mansion on Riverside Drive was truly hers again. Chapter 5 is now complete. May I have permission to continue with the final Chapter 6? 3 weeks after the police escort from Riverside Drive, Marcus Wellington sat in his childhood bedroom at his elderly parents' house, staring at a laptop screen filled with financial ruin. The small room, decorated with faded sports posters from his high school years, felt like a mockery of the sophisticated lifestyle he had enjoyed for the past 15 years. His mother knocked softly on the door before entering with a cup of coffee and the pitying expression she had worn since his humiliating return. "Marcus, honey," she said quietly, "your father and I think you should consider seeing a counselor. This whole situation has been so difficult for our family's reputation." The irony was not lost on Marcus. His parents, who had always been proud of their successful son with his mansion and luxury cars, were now embarrassed to face their neighbors and friends. The local newspaper had picked up the story of his eviction, running a headline that read, "Local developer evicted from wife's property after 15 years." Sophia had lasted exactly 4 days after learning about Marcus's true financial situation. She had disappeared one morning along with several pieces of expensive jewelry that Marcus now realized he had bought with rent money that belonged to Elena. Her parting text message was brief and brutal. "I don't date men who live with their mothers." Dr. Hawthorne had delivered the final crushing blow just yesterday. During a brief meeting in her downtown law office, she had informed Marcus that Elena owned not just the Riverside Drive mansion, but two other properties that he had always believed were part of his real estate portfolio. The lake house in the mountains, where Marcus had hosted numerous business retreats and impressed clients with his apparent wealth, belonged to Elena's family trust. The downtown commercial building that housed 3 upscale restaurants had been purchased by Elena's consulting business 2 years earlier, using profits that Marcus had never known existed. Every asset he had pointed to as evidence of his success had actually belonged to the woman he had spent years treating like an unwelcome houseguest. The revelation was so complete, so devastating, that Marcus had stopped leaving his parents' house altogether. Meanwhile, Elena was experiencing a renaissance that surprised even her closest friends. The first thing she had done after reclaiming her home was hire a team of interior designers to restore the mansion to the way her grandmother had originally decorated it. The cold, modern furnishings that Marcus had preferred were donated to charity, replaced with warm antiques and family heirlooms that had been stored in the basement for years. Margaret Rothschild visited on a sunny Thursday afternoon, bringing homemade cookies and a sincere apology for not speaking up sooner during Marcus's years of public humiliation campaigns. "Elena, I'm so ashamed of how we all stood by and watched him treat you," Margaret confessed as they sat in the restored sunroom, surrounded by her grandmother's beloved plants that Elena had nursed back to health. "We should have said something years ago." Elena poured tea from her grandmother's china service, the delicate roses pattern catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Margaret, you couldn't have known the full situation." Marcus was very skilled at making his version of reality seem believable. Word had spread quickly through their social circle about Elena's true circumstances. The successful business owner who had been hiding in plain sight, the quiet woman who owned multiple properties while being treated like a charity case. The story had become legendary among their friends, inspiring other women to examine their own financial situations more carefully. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne called that evening with news that brought Elena particular satisfaction. She had received a desperate phone call from Marcus's attorney, requesting a meeting to discuss possible financial settlements or property sharing arrangements. "I told him quite firmly that Mrs. Richardson was not interested in any negotiations," Dr. Hawthorne reported with obvious pleasure. "You've been more than generous by allowing him to live in your house for 15 years without charging market-rate rent." Elena walked through her reclaimed home that night, touching furniture that had belonged to her grandmother, admiring photographs that told the real story of the property's history. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since her marriage began, as if the walls themselves were breathing easier without the constant tension of Marcus's presence. The master bedroom had been completely transformed. Gone was the cold gray color scheme that Sophia had planned to implement, replaced with warm yellows and soft blues that reminded Elena of spring mornings in her grandmother's garden. The room felt like a sanctuary again, a place where she could rest without fear of criticism or contempt. On Friday evening, Elena hosted her first dinner party as the undisputed owner of her home. The guests included Dr. Hawthorne, Margaret Rothschild, and several other friends who had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor. The conversation was lively and warm, filled with laughter that echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Elena stood in her front doorway watching the taillights disappear down Riverside Drive. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of leaves and the promise of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a brief note from one of Marcus's former business associates. "Elena, I heard what happened. Just wanted you to know that several of us always suspected Marcus was exaggerating his assets. You're well rid of him." Elena deleted the message and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She had no interest in rehashing Marcus's downfall or collecting sympathy from people who had enabled his behavior for years. Her focus was entirely on the future she was building in the home that had always been hers. Later that night, Elena sat in her grandmother's favorite reading chair in the study, surrounded by books and family photographs that told the true history of the Riverside Drive mansion. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock and the gentle whisper of autumn wind through the trees outside. For the first time in 15 years, Elena Richardson felt completely at peace in her own home. What did you think of Elena's incredible journey from victim to victor? Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated your strength or capabilities? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how justice was served in this shocking tale of hidden ownership and revealed truth.